Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and today I'm going to talk about a not so well known case um, from 1998 in Maryland. And it was the horrible sexual homicide of Sherry Crandell, who was an administrative nurse at the Prince George's Hospital in Cheverly, Maryland. And I'm going to take a bit of a different approach on this case because I just want to bring forth some really interesting issues about investigations and profiling when things don't seem to make sense. And this is one of them. And also, what's kind of interesting in this case is that the detectives working on the case showed up at my home to ask questions. That's a little bit of a twist. It's like, what? And they weren't coming for my professional profiling ability. They didn't know I was a profiler. They came to me because of a connection I had to someone, the hospital. So, and they just showed up at my door. And so I remember this so clearly. So I'm going to get to that aspect of it. But it'll go to show you how extensively they investigated this case and why this is it's still unsolved. And it's driving people nuts, especially the family and the detective who's still working on the case to this day. He was supposed to retire, but he didn't retire, so he could keep on this case. So it's gotten to a lot of people because of its uniqueness and the fact that it doesn't make any sense they couldn't find who did it. So I'm going to get started with that, and I just want to welcome everybody who is here in the chat room. I think I've said hello to everybody as far as Oh, no, Illuminating Ink has just rolled in. Heidi's just rolled in. Valerie's just rolled in. Texas Redhead has just rolled in. And I think I've said hello to everybody else. All right, so, and I keep getting these questions on YouTube saying, Pat, I keep trying to come to your lives, but YouTube never notifies me. Well, that's because most of my lives are not for YouTube subscribers. The live part is for patrons only. And I send out messages to patrons who are supporting me on Patreon, which is this. Now, mind you, all of my videos do go live. I do not have any private videos. I want everybody to be able to watch the videos. And so you only need you don't even need to subscribe, but I do request that you do subscribe to the channel. So you do get notifications when my videos come out, not when they're live, unless I do a public live. Which occasionally I've done recently, but you'll get to see every one of them. Please click the bell for notifications, but subscribe, costs nothing. But if you'd like to be at the 8 lives per month, which include the cases like the one I'm doing today and the hangouts during the week, there's 8 of them a month, then please do click on the link in the description below, join Patreon. It's $5 a month, supports an educational channel. And yes, you do get to come to those lives as well. And I like to keep it that way because it's a little more controllable when I have patrons who are part of the community at the lives as opposed to the entire world. So, which gets kind of out of control. And so I prefer it this way on a regular basis. So that's that. Now, to Sherry Crandell. And what's very unique about this case? Well, let me read you just the basics from this one spot. Now, let me show you what all of you can watch this. The link will be in the description. It is a show called Murder in a Safe Place. It is a podcast. You can get it on Apple, you can get it in various places as a podcast, but there's an awful lot of advertising and it drove me nuts. But I will link below this one, which you can just see on the internet, and you don't need to have a podcast thing that you're using. And there's only a couple advertisements, so it's much easier to watch. You'll be wanting to watch season 2, which is Murder in a Safe Place of the American Nightmare series. And it's about, I think total, maybe it's 8 episodes. So it could take up a whole day. I did a puzzle. I did a 1,000-piece puzzle while I was listening because it's that long. But I wanted to listen because they were talking with the family. They were talking with the main detective on the case. And I want to show you the main detective guy here. And it's very important to me that you know that he's here and that he exists because he plays such a big part in this. His name is Bernie Nelson. He was the original investigator on the case, and he could have retired. I was just chatting with my daughter. She also works for the same police department as he does, and so we were just hanging out at a place called Coconut Joe's in Maryland, where you get to look at the water. It's not at the beach, but they have a little sandy playground for the children, and you can sit out there and have orange crushes and have, you know, tolerable food, but nothing great. And we were talking about this case, and she said, she knows Bernie. And she says he has never let go of this case, and he's not retiring because he wants to keep working on this case. And that's dedication for you. So there's a lot of times, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was this show was so many times people will say the detectives don't care, or they're not trying that hard, or, and just because they're not talking to the family every week, just because they don't have new news doesn't mean they don't care. And in this particular case, you have Bernie, who is just Detective Nelson, who just doesn't want to retire so he can keep the case. Now he could send it over to cold case. I'm not saying they won't do something with it there, but it's a lot of cold cases, and he wants to keep his nose in it, and he keeps wanting to fight because this case is the one case that he would like to see solved of all the cases he's ever had, because it's just such a strange case, and he can't believe they haven't been able to identify the guy who did this. So before I check some of your comments, I know are coming in, let me tell you the basics of it. All right. So this occurred at Prince George's Hospital in Cheverly. I'm just going to show you a couple pictures of the hospital. I have worked at this hospital, by the way. So I have a number of connections to this case. I lived in Maryland. I live in Maryland now. Prince George's Hospital I have worked at over the years as a medical sign language interpreter before I did profiling. And also just before COVID, I just wanted to get out of the house, and I went back and did some medical sign language interpreting. And I worked at Prince George's Hospital among the other hospitals that I worked. So I know what the hospital's like, which is why it's kind of, when I hear her story, I'm like, oh, I know what they're talking about. Okay. So it looks like this. It's an older hospital. It's now been replaced. It's no longer functioning. We have a new University of Maryland hospital in Largo, Maryland. It's all fancy, and it's just all fancy. And the old hospital that served the community is no longer operating. So everything has gone to the new hospital. But I have kind of a soft feeling for this hospital because I've worked there a lot. So that's the way it looks. This is the front of the hospital where you would go in, and pay attention to some of this because this has to do with the crime. Over on the right side, you'll see the parking garage, which I've parked in many a time. And they have doors in that parking garage that go into some of the floors, not necessarily just the first floor, but into the higher floors. And at times, at least in Sherry Crandell's time, you pretty much could just open up that door and walk in the hospital, not go past the desk, not be checked. There's no security, just roll on in. And PG Hospital did not have good security. Let me tell you, it did not. And they got nailed for this after this crime because it was so poor that I wouldn't even call it security. Let me put it that way. But they have ramped the security up. I can say that because when I went back after many years, I would go to the emergency room in the middle of the night, and I would be coming in at this time of night, and I would be parking across the street in the emergency lot, cross over, come into the emergency room, and they would make me wait forever. I'm like, I'm the interpreter. I need to be with the patient. And they were like, you're just going to have to wait till we have somebody to take you where you need to go. And they would get my name, and then the security guard would take me through the locked door. We'd go down to the security office, and I would have to buzz in and go in, sign my name in, come back out, and have the guard escort me to the emergency room, back to the emergency room. But that's not the way it used to be. I didn't have to go through all that process. I could just roll in and do what I wanted to do. So very lax security, and that's an important part of this case. And I also want to point out where it's located, because that's also kind of interesting. Here's another picture of the hospital. And this is a map. The red up on the top that's where Prince George's Hospital is. and you'll see it. There's a highway going behind it, and that's the Baltimore Washington Parkway. So there's nobody really entering that area from the highway portion. The reason I want to point this out is that it was kind of a little bit of an isolated place. That's the hospital you're seeing right in front of you. And then you'll see there's a bunch of trees, and then over to the left side, you'll see there's a kind of housing area, but it's kind of a distance still through the trees and everything. There's no real shops in that area. If you get hungry while you're working there at night, you're just going to have to, eat out of the machines. During the day, you definitely go to the cafeteria because you can't run across the street to buy food because it's not there. The food is going to be further away, where you see that Landover Road as the big road there. You'll see that's where there's shops, but you see how far a distance it is from the actual hospital. So the point being that it's kind of isolated, and that has something to do with how this crime went down. So anyway, she was murdered. She was working at the hospital on the 4th floor. It was called the Family Health Center. It was during the day. Family Health Center meant a number of different people came through that, family issues, obviously taking children, pregnant women, things like that during the day. And then at 5 o'clock, it ended and closed down. And it was on the 4th floor. And let me show you the picture of, this is kind of like more of the waiting room area. So here you'd have, that would be the nurse's station. And then down that hall there, which looks rather dark at this moment in the picture, down the hall toward the end is some administrative offices. So the offices are also kind of isolated within the hospital. First, you have to go to the 4th floor to this one area, and then you got to go all the way down to one of those offices. Most of the time, those offices were fairly empty. I mean, especially after everything closed down and people went home, the doctors left, because this was, again, it was a family health center. It's not the emergency room. It's not the regular floors of the hospital. It is a daytime thing where people come, a lot of people who are struggling with incomes go there. And people at the end of the day go home, except Sherry. She was the administrator, and so she worked hard, and she often stayed late. Her kids were pretty much grown. I think one or two were at college, one's at home, but they were all, older. And she was in the process of divorce or divorce. Depends what you read a couple of different versions on that. But here's a picture of Sherry's on the left, and I think that is the X on the right. That's her daughter graduating. These are her 3 kids. More like today. That's a plaque for her in front of the hospital. And here's another picture of her. And here's one more picture of her at work. And one of the other reasons I want to point this out, she's a 50-year-old woman. And she's, what do you want to say? I would say she's not a fashion model is all. I want to point this out. And people don't like it when I do, because they say, what does that have to do with anything? A lot of times serial killers really do like 19, 20-year-olds. Now, some of them will kill 80-year-old women and sexually assault 80-year-old women, usually teenagers, because that's who lives next door, like a scrawny little teenage boy. He's like, oh, I'm going to try this. And there's an elderly woman next door, and he knows he can win, or he thinks he can, until she beats him with some object in her room, which happens. But I just point this out because there's no evidence she was dating anybody. Anybody had a kind of fixation on her, that she was being stalked. She was if you look at her, would think a very nice looking, average, not skinny, middle-aged woman. That's where I put it. So all I'm saying is that she's not the number one target usually of a sexual assault. It doesn't mean that older women and heavier women aren't attacked and sexually assaulted. They are, but just saying. And people don't want to listen to that, but that's true. So it's an interesting point in this case. She had no stalkers, and she wasn't involved with anybody. She was simply working. She was doing what she did, working. And everybody said she was like the nicest lady ever. Her kids absolutely adored her. People who worked with her thought she was fantastic. They really liked the fact that as an administrator, she would eat lunch with the people of lower levels. You know what I mean? Sometimes only administrators only hang out with the other administrators and won't hang out with their own staff or whatever. She did. She didn't. She was not, snobby. So everybody just thought she was just the greatest. I just want to point that out. She's just really, really well liked. But as this story up here, I'll just read this because I think it's just an interesting way of introducing it. Inside a building where people are dedicated to healing and saving lives, Sherry Crandell ended up losing her life. The murder of Sherry Crandell was so surprising, so surreal, the detective tapped to lead the investigation initially didn't believe it. It's like, you got to be kidding. So wait a minute, somebody was raped and murdered? What, in the hospital? The victim's daughter, Tiffany Crandell, had just graduated from Penn State and was visiting friends when she got the news. Can you imagine? Sherry Crandell was a registered nurse, and in the 4 years before her death, she worked as an administrator in the family practice clinic at Prince George's Hospital Center. She had just turned 50 years old, dedicated to her job. She would sometimes stay late. One of those nights was the evening of January 13th, 1998. It was around 8:30 p.m., and Sherry was finishing some paperwork in a somewhat secluded section of the hospital when she was attacked. And she was the one who tended to stay late. The reason I went into this whole thing is that she was being stalked or somebody was obsessed with her and all that is mostly because if that were true, they would be paying attention to her being there at the hospital, that she was still at the hospital late at night and they could go and get her then. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. So the person who came and did something to her, did he even know she was there? Why would he know she was there? Or was it accidental that he was doing something else and ran into her and she was there? And this is a question no one has answered, okay? She was bound, raped, and strangled. Now, when they say bound, she was bound by, there was like an intercom system and the guy pulled out the cord from that, bound her hands. I heard something about her feet being bound, but that seems to be, I don't know the accuracy of that. She was definitely raped. She was partially clothed. She had some marks on her neck from a knife. She wasn't stabbed. They said stabbed, but in some places, but I don't think she was stabbed. I think she was just, her neck was cut. That was control. The guy was controlling her with the knife. But he did not kill her with a knife. He strangled her, and not with he didn't use a cord to strangle her with. He used his hands, and he strangled her with his hands. So that's what happened to her. Now, so she's working there in the hospital, and it says there were no cameras that caught anything. No, and that's true. There were a few cameras around the hospital in 1998, but the one on her floor didn't have any film in it. So it was, and some of them are just fake, and hers had no film in it. So, which wouldn't that have been nice? But let's stop with the question here. If you see cameras, do you think they're working? Did the person who killed her know they were working, or didn't he know they were working? So I'm going to, during this first part, I'm just going to present a lot of questions to you, as if you were investigating this case. I'm not going to profile at this point. I'm just going to point out these questions so you can see how difficult it is. And I'm going to go get some of your ideas so you can feel like, if this were your case, what are you going to do with the thing? So there were some cameras there, but they weren't necessarily working. So did the person who killed her know about the cameras? Did he know if they worked, or didn't he? Then there was a problem with security. And this becomes an interesting part of the case as well. Now, there is in her office, and these are some photos. These are crime scene photos, but her body's not there. So these are not crime scene photos that are horrifying or anything. But here is this is her office, and you see that the drawers pulled open. Some things are on the floor. Was the guy looking for something? There's stuff like I don't know if that's evidence of a struggle or evidence of him just banging around in there, pulling out stuff. There were People came up from the emergency room to try to save her life. I don't know how much they messed up. I really don't. So you just have all these sort of pictures of things, and you're like, what do they mean? Here's a couple more. Here's a shoe. See, you can see it's messy, and there's some chairs there that people would sit in, I guess, if they were talking to her, and there's stuff on them, but I can't tell what some of the stuff is. Like, is that her purse to the right? And there are some file cabinets that seem to be messed up. This, from outside the investigation, I can't tell you what any of that means. I've never heard that anything was stolen. Now, she had a box on her desk, which she had candy in, and it was for some charity. So the thing said, basically, if you take a candy, can you put a little money in there to, help the charity? I don't have any evidence that there was any money ever in there at the time this went down. Did this guy steal the money from there? How much money would have been in there? Would a guy, like some detective did theorize, maybe the guy came there to steal money from that box? I mean, would you go through all that to steal money from that box? And if you were caught doing it, would you then commit a sexual homicide? And if he wasn't stealing that, what was he looking for? What was he looking for in that office? I mean, it's an administrative office. It's not full of a lot of stuff. Why would you be in there? So that's another interesting issue. There's another story that 3 weeks prior to her murder, her administrative assistant was there, and she was looking out. This was a little bit after hours, I believe. She was looking out, and she saw a guy in the waiting room taking the TV off the wall. And she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I've got to fix it. Only he didn't work for the hospital. So he was trying to, I don't know if he actually stole the TV or he was trying to steal the TV, but basically he was stealing the TV off the wall. This is 3 weeks prior. Now, how would he know the TV was there? Did he work in the hospital? Or was he one of the people that came in during the day to the appointments and say, I'm coming to this appointment for my wife or my girlfriend or me or whatever. And, we don't have much money. And by the way, we don't have a TV in our apartment yet. Maybe I'll come back for that. Could that have happened? Okay. So there was a problem at the hospital, and Sherry wrote this email about the situation. She said, I'm not satisfied with the response and the repeated acts of theft. I want to go on record and voice my fear that the next incident may involve a personal assault. This was too close. And 3 weeks later, there was a personal assault, and it was Sherry. What does that mean? Does that mean I don't, when there's a personal thefts, the question is, I think there was a computer stolen once. I'll have to say, when I was interpreting, I had sometimes been sitting in a room, and when the doctor and nurses left the room, I've seen patients go through the drawers and pick out things they want to take home with them. I have seen that. And they're like, and they steal stuff right in front of me. And you might ask why I didn't report that, because there's a whole weird thing about as an interpreter, you're just there to interpret. You're not there to be involved as a staff member or to be involved in any other aspects of what's going on. So, but people are often left alone. Usually, without an interpreter, if you're hearing, you're left without an interpreter in a room. And most of us don't think we should go through the drawers and steal stuff, but people do it all the time. So I don't know what kind of theft she's talking about. Is she talking about thefts in those situations? Is she talking about thefts like people stealing your purse, computers, whatever? And she said the security was lax, and it was lax as heck over there, completely. And I worked there, so I knew that. I wandered those halls all the time by myself in the night, looking for whatever. Because I can't remember when the cafeteria closes there. Some hospitals keep a cafeteria open all night. I think theirs closed, but I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've interpreted. But I'd wander the halls because I went to the first soda machine and my soda wasn't there. So I just walk around the hospital looking for whatever I wanted. Nobody ever stopped me. I didn't even think about the safety factors, to tell you the truth. Just wandered all over the place. And so, yeah, and security there was very minimal. If you're lucky to see a security guard. So in the case of the TV issue, her assistant contacted security right away and said, "Get up here, guys, stealing the TV off the freaking wall." And took them 30 to 40 minutes to send a security guard. That's what got her goose. She's like, "Come on now. This is ridiculous. This is not any kind of security." And I have worked in psych wards. Was it? That was PG. That was PG. I just remember this now. And I actually told them, "You have such lax security in here that I will not come out of the break room unless I'm coming out specifically to interpret and I'm there with the doctor and the nurse." But they told me I should sit around in the break room, just the open area for everybody. I should sit there while people watch TV and chit chat and all that stuff. And I'm looking at some really big guys in there who have issues. That's why they're in the psych ward. And if you call for help because something's going wrong, it'll be a long time before somebody shows up. And I had been assaulted there before. Actually, I was assaulted there, and I was assaulted at Children's Hospital Center. So I'm telling you, the security in a lot of hospitals is very lax. So I refused to go back to Children's. I said, "Look, I'm not going to sit there in your psych. I wouldn't the psych ward part. I'm not going to sit there. You don't have any protection for people there." I got assaulted by a very large child, 9 years old, but he looked about 13 or 14, and he just came out of his room and just came at me and attacked me. I was sitting there doing nothing. Security guard was not between me and the kid. That was the problem. And then the kid came back, and then after he got the kid back in the room, he went back outside again. The kid came right back out and attacked me twice. And after that, I walked away, and they had a discussion with me because they didn't want me to sue them. Yeah. So I had real strong rules then about working on the psych wards because they did not have proper security. And when something was going wrong, they would call for security. Meanwhile, somebody's being beaten to death, and 20, 30 minutes later, somebody show up. So yeah. PG didn't have good security, and neither did some other hospitals. So she was totally right about that. She was concerned. I wish she had been concerned enough not to stay late at night where she did not have protection. So then what happened was, she was, I'll read you what Bernie Nelson has to say. And let me show you Bernie again. Bernie, where are you, Bernie? Let me tell you what he had to say about this crime. He said that she was attacked. In fact, there was no one, she wasn't found until 9:15 p.m. Also keep in mind the time that this is nighttime. And it's also January 13th, and I'll get into the issues of temperature in a bit. 45 minutes later, when a cleaning lady called security, that's when they finally showed up. So the cleaning team found her. And so there was a lot of time for the killer just to leave. This gets a little bit more interesting when you see about the witness who actually thinks she saw the murder. But Bernie says, "We do believe that she may have interrupted a theft in progress." Okay. I don't know that I agree with that. Yes, it looked like maybe somebody had been in her office doing something, but maybe he did it after he tied her up, and then he looked through her stuff to see what he could get before he left. Is that really the office he would pick? How would he find that office? What was he looking for in that office besides a little bit of candy money? But it's a theory. And he also says he was opportunistic because he used the cord from within the office to tie her up. So that does sound opportunistic, except he also had a knife. That doesn't sound opportunistic. So here we have one thing or the other thing. And you also have to ask if it was being opportunistic. Why did he commit a rape and a murder? If he was just caught, he was just shuffling through her stuff. Why didn't he just run? Why did he take this much extra time to commit a sexual homicide? Or was that that was his plan all along? Again, one or the other. It appears he was in there for a while in order to tie her up the way he did, and also to partially remove some of her clothing. There were signs of a sexual assault. Yes, so she was raped. We know he was in there, I would estimate, for approximately 15 to 20 minutes, at least. And again, even though it was a sort of isolated part of the hospital, the cleaning crew was up there. There were a number of cleaning crew people cleaning the halls, cleaning the bathrooms. They were on the floor and in the hallways and in the lobby, the whole area where the waiting room area. There was a cleaning crew there. So either the guy didn't think a cleaning crew was going to be up there, and therefore he did think he had free range and no one was going to disturb him, or what? You know, again, was he did he come from within the hospital or from without the hospital? Did he know about the cameras? Did he know about the cleaning crews? Why did he pick Sherry Crandell, or did he just run into her? So these are some more questions. All right. They did get fingerprints and they got DNA. The guy wasn't that careful. Okay, but this is 1998. They weren't as careful back then. All right. Now, before I go, I'll go look at some of your comments in a second, but I want to point out this woman here. She was a cleaning lady in the hospital. This is her. It was Edna Brown. Okay. Now, Edna Brown, I'll link below her actual interview with the police. And she was claimed to be, well, they interviewed her that very day, but they didn't tell the public about her until recently. They just, like in the last couple of years, they just found out about that there was a witness to the actual crime going down. All right. Now, Edna Brown, she was a housekeeper. She was that was there that day. Now, she was walking. This is what she says, and this is why it's such a bizarre thing. They say, this is what they said about her. She is now deceased, that she was intellectually disabled, the new word, or at least what they would call slow. She talks perfectly fine. She doesn't seem that intellectually disabled to me. Does she seem slow? I don't know. Some people are slower than others. That's all. She said this. She's up there. She's cleaned a couple bathrooms. She's up on the floor. So she's cleaning bathrooms. This is important too. She's on the floor doing work. Again, the guy killer was already there doing stuff, killing Sherry, raping her, killing her, whatever he was doing while there was a cleaning lady on the floor. Actually, there was more than one. She said, I heard the lady screaming twice. Then she walks closer to where she heard the sound. And she said, I saw the lady lying on the floor. Now, she saw the lady lying on the floor in her office. What does that tell you? I will go to your comments on this because I think this is interesting. What do you think? What does that tell you right there about that? I'll get to the reporting issue in a minute. It's very strange. Yes, the witness. I'm sorry, collected. She didn't report it. Yes and no. I'll get to that in a second. But I want to. Well, there's an interesting point. Harper said, did the perpetrator know the cleaning lady was slow? Well, there were other people cleaning on the floor too. There were a couple others. So there's three of them. So that wouldn't make any difference. But tell me what the problem is, what I just said about she hears a scream, she comes and she sees the lady on the floor. More than that, she says, okay, I'll read a little bit more while I'm waiting to see about that, why I think that's so interesting. I saw the lady laying on the floor. The man's hands were around her neck. I thought the man was helping her. Seems like he wasn't helping her. He was hurting her. Yes, there was DNA. Well, there's... Thank you, Carla. The door was open. Or was there a window? The door. She had to have seen this from the hallway through the open door. So that I find very interesting right there. It's like, what the heck? So one would think this person thought there was nobody ever going to be on that floor, including the crew, the cleaning crew, which, you're working in a hospital. You never know who's going to show up on those floors. I would think that to me, that's very strange. I mean, I walked around through halls and every once in a while I ran into somebody doing something, picking up something, cleaning something, an orderly going here or there. You never know. And it wasn't that late at night. We're not talking 3 a.m, although there's cleaning people around, usually in areas which need extra cleaning, like emergency room and on the floors of the hospital. If you're working, still need cleaners up on the floors. I mean, people come out of they take a walk down the hallway and they throw up. I mean, you got to have somebody to clean. So you got people coming through cleaning. It's a weird thing to think that nobody would be cleaning, although this wasn't supposedly an administrative area. But this person didn't think about cleaning people. So I find that interesting. And that he would have the door, that he would commit this crime with a door open. What was she doing there? No, she leave doors as you find them. What was she doing? She's cleaning. Yeah, she was doing the right thing. She is not a suspect in any way, shape, or form. She wasn't doing anything wrong. This is an interesting question. Did she know the perp and was afraid of them? She claims she didn't know who he was, but that's a good question, and not an unreasonable one to ask her. She was interviewed, I think, 3 times. So let me read you the rest of her statement here. Then she says, well, I thought he was helping her. Now, she said he had a white lab coat on. And she also said at some other point, he had what looked like a blue stethoscope in the pocket, but he did not have a name tag. So you normally, if you have a lab coat, you have your name on it. And it's just a lab coat. Now, mind you, anybody can walk to a hospital and grab a lab coat. That's not a big deal. Also, the question is, how long was she standing there? She claims she stood there for 5 minutes, which is a pretty damn long time. However, she might have been in shock. She may not have, it may have only been 5 seconds and she's just, she's not explaining properly. The white lab coat could have not been a white lab coat. It could have been, I don't know, a service coat, like working in could have somebody working in a kitchen. It's even possible it was just a coat, some kind of white coat. But do you believe everything she says or do you not? So anyway, she said if she heard screaming, maybe thought, oh, well, she choked on something. And this guy's, a doctor and he's helping her and he's trying to get a new version of the Heimlich, So, but then she says, well, then she later realized, oh, he wasn't helping her. He was killing her. But she sees this, supposedly stands there for a bit, and then she leaves. She said she went to pick up the telephone, but then a voice told her to get out of there. Now, a voice in her head of some sort, get out, get out. Well, she may have realized, if it were true that she saw what she saw, that guy might kill her. I mean, if you're a witness and he looked up and saw her, yeah, he might go after her and kill her. So she should get out of there in that sense. But did she report it? No, she didn't. Another person from the cleaning crew found Sherry's body. He was the one that tried to do CPR, called for help, and reported it to security, and then they sent up the people from the ER to try to save Sherry's life, and took her to the ER and were unable to resuscitate her. So she was then pronounced dead. But the other cleaners were around, just not at that location on that floor at that moment where she was. So no, she didn't report it. She thought about it with that phone, but apparently she did not, and she got out of there. And then, so it gets very confusing as to what did she actually see? How much did she see? Oh, and she also later described the man as being black, 40s, with black hair on the sides and some gray on top. Is this the guy? Did he look like that? Don't go back to the television thief, right? They said that the television thief and her description don't match. But that doesn't mean the television thief wasn't also the killer. He could have come back and decided to steal something else and ran into Sherry, theoretically. So television thief could be the killer. Maybe her description is complete garbage. The problem is it's hard to know. And this is, I think, what poor Bernie Nelson, Detective Nelson, has been dealing with for years. He's like, what do I believe? So what he had to go with, because it was real questionable, what the guy looked like, or where he came out of, or what his motive was, why he would pick Sherry or not pick Sherry, or just pick that hole, that 4th floor. What was he doing there? Now, I want to point out that when you're looking at the lab coat, immediately you think it's somebody from the inside. And there's one other reason to think that has some possibilities of being true. And I looked at the temperature that day. All right. This is the January 1998 temperatures. And this is Baltimore, but it's same for DC. I checked. Okay, 53 degrees that was the high, but the low is 34. So it's, probably at 8 in the evening, you're talking probably about 40, 45 degrees. And it was a little bit damp, a little rainy. If the guy came from the outside, would he not have a coat on of some sort? Maybe a hat, maybe a little cap? If it came from the outside, especially if he was walking in from the outside, you would definitely think he'd have something more than just a shirt and a lab coat. If he came in from the garage, you'd think he'd be wearing more clothing. Don't know. But they got a fingerprint and they got DNA. Okay, so I'm going to check some of your comments before I go on. Hold on, I got to put my sweater back on. See, now I was hot. Now I'm cold. So, hold on a second. Mommy, can you help me put my sweater on? Sometimes you wish you had help. Okay, there we go. All right. Let's see. Oh, try to put this on with you. No, she didn't ask if she could help him. She didn't ask him. No, she just, this is, I say, it's tough to know whether she is truly, if people knew she was very slow, she may not have reacted in a normal manner. She may have looked over there down that hall, saw the door open and said, oh, I wonder what he's doing with her. I guess he's helping her. Or maybe not helping, but I don't know. She just may be truly slow. And I don't, unless I was interviewing her and interviewed all the people who worked with her. But the people who worked with her said she was, quote, slow. So, no, she didn't ask to help. She just walked away and seemed to be, anybody else have mommy issues? Let's see, a fake doctor. Well, yes, it could be. It could be in the sense that anybody grabs a lab coat, you can look like a doctor. Was there somebody there that put that coat on so that they could feel more comfortable walking to the hospital and not be questioned? Makes sense. Now, as far as we can go back to the coat issue, it's cold outside. Well, that person could have stolen a lab coat, could have left the coat in the car and come in with a lab coat. See, this is what gets difficult when you're doing investigating, because you can come up with one reasonable scenario and say, I wonder why, and then you can come up with a reason that maybe it happened a different way. Now, could somebody have been pissed off that Sherry complained about the security? Maybe the guy who runs security in that hospital is really annoyed with that, and he knows where she works, and he saw that email, and he got his vengeance on her. You'd have to be a psychopath. You'd have to be, he didn't just attack her. He committed a sexual homicide. And those people come in a whole different category. There was an interesting story done during the podcast where there was another crime talked about. And the guy had, I can't remember all the details. But anyway, basically this young guy, was like 18 or 19 or 20 at the time, shot this shopkeeper. And they didn't know who it was, and took them like decades with using familiar genetic stuff to track this guy down. They finally did. And he has a gun with him, and he basically lets his wife know. He says, he texts or calls his wife and says, look, I committed this horrible crime, 40 years ago. I've always felt guilty over it, but but I didn't, I never came forward. I just, I did a stupid thing when I was a kid, and I feel horribly guilty over it, but I can't go to jail. And he committed suicide by cop. And so the detective, they were talking about it and saying, well, that guy committed one crime and he never committed another crime. And therefore he had this guilt and he felt bad about what he'd done. Maybe the killer of Sherry Crandell feels the same way. And that's why the DNA from the scene has never shown up. And they put it through all the, the banks, the CODIS and stuff, and it's never matched anybody in all these years. So there's only two possibilities. The guy never committed another crime. And they're saying, well, maybe because he felt guilty about this. I'm going to say a person who commits a sexual homicide never feels guilt. That's a psychopath. The other guy, I can see he's, there are people who are young, teenage years who get do some real stupid things, and they panic, and then they shoot somebody in a panic. And I get that. I won't necessarily call that person a psychopath. But a person who goes up into an office and ties up a woman, puts a knife to her throat and rapes her and then strangles her to death, that's a psychopath. And he's committed a sexual homicide. That makes him a serial killer. Don't have proof he committed a sexual homicide before, but seemed like he didn't have a problem committing this one. And he wouldn't have a problem committing the next one. So why isn't he showing up anywhere? Now, in this day and age, because we have a lot more immigration, a lot more illegal immigration, one could say, well, he's, an illegal immigrant. He never got caught for anything else, but but also he could be a perfectly legal guy. He could be an immigrant and be legal, or he could be a non-immigrant and be legal, and just never committed a crime that put his DNA in a bank, or he just never got caught. Could have committed. There are serial killers out there who have killed 10 people when they finally get caught, and they have no idea who the heck this guy is. His DNA wasn't in the bank. Why? Because they never. Well, if he left DNA at other scenes, then his DNA would then match. If you look at the recent case of Rachel Moore in Maryland that I did the profile on, there's DNA at her scene, and it matches DNA from another crime in Los Angeles. So the DNA does exist in 2 crime scenes. They just don't know who the DNA belongs to because they haven't got the guy. But in this case, in Sherry Crandell's case, the DNA does not match any other crimes either. It doesn't match any guy, but it also doesn't match any other crimes. So did he just not leave DNA at other crimes? Did he get hit by a truck a week later? Could be, and therefore he's not even alive. And that's why you keep looking for a guy who was literally a ghost. But they had, I'll get into the DNA dragnet next, but they had 2 options in this. The guy worked at the Prince George's hospital, or he didn't. Now, if he worked there, that was their number one group of people. Could be anybody who worked there. It could be that they did go to the executives too. So a lot of people say, well, you're not including them. You're just including the orderlies and the cooks and the cleaners. And so there was an ACLU issue over that, because it was like, are they targeting? But no, they just DNA the crap out of every male, because it was male DNA. DNA the crap out of everyone in the hospital and said, give us your DNA. Give us your fingerprint DNA. We need to talk to you to exclude you, because we need to find this person. And it became an issue of whether they were pressuring people too much, and whether it was a violation of civil rights and all this kind of stuff. But some people thought if I give DNA, it's going to be forever, held, and it's not true. They'll get rid of it, because you're not committing a crime, and it's not. If your DNA doesn't match the crime scene DNA, they will get rid of it. So, but people don't trust the government. So they did DNA the hell out of that hospital, and they went and so that was the first place they were looking at, who was in the hospital. I'll go to some of your comments, and then I'll come back to some more. See, those are the questions, Lex. Exactly why her, why there, why them? Yes. And I don't think any of those have ever been answered. Did any employee resign immediately after the incident for some reason, or were they fired? And I don't know. They have never, ever been clear about that. This is part of the investigation. And again, after I've seen so much crap, and I will say the word crap, in the Sebastian Rogers case down in Tennessee, the missing autistic boy. I have people coming after me going, you're wrong. The police we are the citizens. The police we have the right to know what the police know. No, you don't. It's an open investigation. They cannot tell you everything, and they cannot tell you every name. That is not your business. Your business is to know that they're doing a good job, that they're investigating. And I don't have a problem with an oversight committee at a certain point, making sure that the proper job was done. I'm totally for that. But in the midst of an investigation, you can't just give the public every single shred of people you've talked to and what their DNA said and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody left. I don't know if they got fired. I don't know who refused to give DNA. There were like 6 people that refused, but supposedly they were eventually cleared. somehow or some way. And I don't know what that some way was, but so they're not everybody agreed, but they came up with 0 on the employees. So you don't think she was specifically targeted, unless it was a revenge crime. The only thing I can think, there's only 2 reasons why I think she could have been targeted. One would be revenge, and the only revenge could be over the emails. By the way, her husband was excluded. Husband didn't do it. The ex-husband, he was not involved. If she sent the emails, and sometimes what you look is for an incident very close to the time of the crime that could have then caused the crime to occur. Caused, I put quotes around that. So the one thing was thefts and her complaint to security 3 weeks prior. Could somebody from security have been annoyed with her and thought that B should not have complained about us and targeted her? And a person who would do that may also well be a psychopath, and maybe they are already a serial killer. How do we know? Because security guards is the number 1 job of serial killers. That is true. Could it be somebody in security? Could have been a head of security? I don't know. But she could have been targeted for that. That's a theory or that person could have been up there on the floor looking for something. Maybe for whatever reason they're on the floor, but they are a serial killer, and they're looking. They know. Oh, maybe they've heard that she works late at night. Maybe somebody overheard her say, "Well, I got to work late tonight. In the family health. I'm up at the family health center. I got to work late. I got so much to do." Maybe somebody knew she always went up there to work. Could be anybody who was aware of how things worked in the hospital. Could be aware that she worked up there late and thought, "Hey, she's just an opportunity. Nobody's usually up on that floor. I'll just go in there and I'll go have my fun." Tricky. We don't have an answer for that. We absolutely don't. I want to point out what you just said about. Let's see. Oh, of course they did, Allison. They checked out every single person in the hospital. Everybody who there were like. I think they said they have written down 400, but I think it was actually, they said closer to 800. That hospital is a huge place, and there's an awful lot of tons of people who work there. The security, not so much. They didn't have enough in security, so they have way less security guards than they should have had, let me tell you. But they have, large kitchen staff. They got cleaning staffs. They got orderlies. They've got technicians. They've got doctors and executives and secretaries and ambulance drivers. And also EMTs come into the hospital, firefighters come to the hospital. They roll in and out all the time. Could be any of those people. Did they check them out ad nauseum? And they never came up with anybody. I want to tell you the funny story about me, though. So what happened was a story about how they showed up at my house, which is so weird. Now, I was already about to open my profiling agency, but they had no idea who I was. As far as they were concerned, I was a lady who lived in that house. And they didn't even know I was a medical sign language interpreter, and they didn't know I'd ever worked at Prince George's Hospital either. So there was no reason for them to show up for me, for my work, except for this. So when it's in my book, you'll see there's a story in the first part of my book about a renter that I had who I suspected was involved in a sexual homicide. Turned in evidence against him, took them years to bring him in. They believed it was him. And then the whole story took a very strange turn. And I will at some point in the a little bit far future go for a FOIA request, but not at this point in time. However, so this guy, after this happened in 1990. So the guy, after this very strange stuff about this guy, I got him out of the house immediately. And so he was gone, but the police never came to the house. I talked with the detectives on that case. They never came to the house. And, it took them actually 6 or 7 years to interview him, something like that. But anyway, these 2 detectives turned up at my house. I opened up the door and there's these 2 guys, Prince George's County homicide, right? And I was excited. I'm like, oh, maybe there's some news on my suspect. And I said, oh, you're here for so-and-so. And they just looked at me and went, no. And I'm like, What the heck are you here for then? I'm like, what? You're not here about him? They went, no, we're here about this guy. I'm going to call him William just for the sake of it. Okay. We're here about William so-and-so. And I went, he was another renter of mine. I have bad luck with renters apparently, right? So anyway, I went, William? And I was like totally confused. And they went, yes, because he was in the hospital the day prior to Sherry Crandell being murdered. He and his wife were patients there. I don't know if him or his wife had their appointment, but he was there at the hospital that day. At least that's what I gleaned from them. And the address that they had for the guy was my address. Now, mind you, when I was going over this case, I was trying to remember back to the day that the detective showed up. I talked to him, and I could not remember. This was a 1998 crime, Sherry Crandell crime, 1998. And I'm trying like heck to remember when the guy lived in my house. And I looked it up. I went on Maryland case search, which you can go and look at people's backgrounds. And I came up with my address under this guy one time, but it was listed as 1989. I'm like, what the heck? I wasn't even working that's not possible. He wasn't there in my house. That didn't happen. And I'm trying to figure it out because the renter they were talking about, William, I had met while I was working at Washington Hospital Center as an interpreter. And I know that I hadn't been working as an interpreter prior to 1993. So I'm looking at these records and I'm going, what the heck? So it seems that there was a record on him, but there were all these things that came on after that 89, then 1990, 91. This whole case went on forever. I think it was a child, some kind of somebody wanted his money. Probably the woman, the baby mama, but anyway. And so somehow my address came from the future linked to an 1989 case, but he was not there then. So I contacted my kids. I said, how old were you when he was in the house? And my sons told me they thought they were 10. And I said, really? That would put him in the house. And so I eventually did a search on his name and his daughter's name and all that stuff. And I found his daughter was now 28. And therefore, he was in my house 1995 to 1996. So he was there prior to 1998 when he was supposedly in there and had become a possible suspect. Now, let me back up just so I can tell you the basic story why he was in the house and then why he might have been a suspect. All right, so I met him and his wife. I'll call her Mary. William and Mary like the college. Anyway, I met them. I was interpreting for his wife. She was pregnant. And I was sitting with the two of them in the room. The doctor comes in and he says, I have to tell you something. I have to give you some news. And he looked at her and he said, you're HIV positive. And William, I never forgot it. William just jumped up, hands to his head like this, and he ran out of the room. And then the doctor just left. Thanks, Doc. So I'm sitting there with Mary, and she's now crying. And she was a church lady and had an unfortunate rape situation. And first child, and now she's HIV positive. And this was back in the days when things weren't so good as far as treatment goes. And she's just sitting there looking at me, and she's, I'm now there with her. And about 10 minutes passes, and her husband comes back in, William. Mind you, I forgot to tell you, she's deaf and he's hearing. He doesn't sign very well. So I had to interpret for him, for her. They hadn't been together that long, so he wasn't that good at signing. So he comes back in and he sits down and she turns to him, and I had to interpret this. She says, if you want a divorce, I understand. And he looked at her and he said, you're my wife and I will never divorce you. I love you. Cry. Yeah, I was sitting there. That was the kind of guy William was. And after she was pregnant, and they asked me if they needed a place to stay. They weren't doing well financially. They came and lived in my house with their daughter, and the little baby. They lived there for about a year because the baby was there for about a year, and they're very, very nice people, very sweet. He adored her, and but he was a he was a bit of a, well, he'd had problems in his life, drifting and doing a few little petty crimes. And a couple times he called me from the Prince George's jail. Will you accept a call from the Prince George's jail? And I'm like, oh. I'm like, what are you doing there, William? He's like, oh, can you tell her I'm not going to be home tonight? So he wasn't a 100% honorable fellow in certain ways. I think he did have some petty theft issues. But I'll tell you this about the man. They moved out after a year. He came back with about 5 years later with two children, that child and another child, and they had dinner together, and they went out to the car, and he ran back in. And he said, "I'm a lucky man, and you know why." And he meant that his wife was still alive. And his kids grew up, and she died in 2016, I believe. And he told me the story because the HIV went to AIDS. And he had the hospital bed in the living room, and he slept with her in the hospital bed until the day she died. I love the guy. So the detectives are at my door saying, I'm like, this guy is not a serial killer. The other guy, yes. The other renter, yes. Maybe. I'm not saying the other one is, but the other one definitely was a psychopath. Not this guy. Yes, I know he's a little sketchy sometimes. That's not the guy you're looking for. And but I'm looking at this case. I'm thinking about the guy taking the TV off the wall. I'm like, well, maybe. But this is people are. There's so many varieties in human beings, even in crimes, that because they do one thing doesn't mean they'll do another thing. Apparently, they did contact him. He gave DNA. He's not the guy. Okay. I actually. He came back and stayed with me with his son a number of years ago, and stayed for about a month. And I still love him. I think he's a great guy, and yeah, he's got his little problems, but yeah, yeah. So yeah, that sucked. She was not a drug user. Yeah, it was unbelievable. So. Yeah, he does not sound like a serial killer. That guy had a good heart and a kind heart, and he was very, very gentle with ladies. And I mean, I never saw anything psychopathic with him. I say he was a little sketchy sometimes. So I mean, I'm really pretty strong on the psychopath word, especially when it comes to criminals. When you break the law, you're unethical, immoral, whatever. But I do know there's some guys who are just a little bit borderline, but they're not. He's the type of guy that did things like, I need some money. I need this, Yeah, I'm not saying he was not a perfect guy, that's for sure. But I did not see him as a serial killer. But when they showed up at my door, I'm like, seriously? You gotta be kidding me. I mean, no, and he never stole anything from my house in an entire year. Yeah, he has empathy. Thank you very much. He had empathy. Yes, he did have empathy for his kids, for other people, for his wife. Yeah, when he came back in and said, I'm not going to divorce you because I love you. I mean, it was just so sweet. I mean, just the way he said it was just amazing. And yeah, but no, he never stole one thing from my house. I'm not going to say I know what happened with the neighbors' houses, but he never, ever touched anything in my house. So, and I did go back and look at his criminal record, and I can't find anything in it at all. There's no crimes listed at all for Maryland. He has a couple. He has he has traffic ticket stuff. Now the old crimes may have been expunged. They may have been minor crimes that were expunged because now he's in his 60s. And I think there's a new rules about expunging things like that. So they don't have to dog you forever because you stole a bicycle when you were, 20 years old, something like that. Well, that is true. That is not true. Apparently, you don't know some people. Sometimes they do. No, you're right. That sometimes people are very, very good at home and not good elsewhere. This is true. Even serial killers sometimes their wife will say they're always nice to me. It's like, well, he was nice to you while he was killing other women. Lucky you. So that's true. That is absolutely true, though. So that doesn't prove anything. But I think I just saw enough of this man and about the way he thought. Yeah, it didn't match well. And he didn't say DNA proved him not to be guilty of anything. So thank God. That's true. Yeah, some mobsters do, but they do love that power and control. The mobsters usually, it always helps. They have something else to offer the ladies, whether it be money or whether it be I'm a strong man, or whether it be good sex, or whether she doesn't have any choices. It's hard to say. Okay, I want to check this out. Since it happened after hours, a perp may have wanted to steal something in administrative offices thinking no one would be there and was surprised. If not, who knew she was there? Well, that's it, and that's what they do not know. And it's very hard to figure out because we have sometimes, for example, serial killers are often also burglars. This is true. Why is that? They like breaking into people's houses. They like getting into other people's territories, not only the body territory, but also the home territory. So a lot of times what will happen too is you'll have a guy who comes in to burgle, and he'll also commit a sexual homicide. This is true. So it's just a weird kind of spot to commit the burglary in. And yes, it was okay. One could say that if he wasn't aware that there was going to be cleaning people on the floor, he might have thought he had free reign. And I'm going to go down there and steal a bunch of stuff. Maybe he's going to go to other offices, and he only got to the first office, and Sherry walked back in. She was in the bathroom, for example, and he goes into her office. But one would think that if she's the only one working there at night, unless they're cleaning an office, the offices should be dark. Her office should be the one with the light on. And so it's just a whole bunch of things you just go through in your head and you go, does this make sense? There's no camera to see the guy coming and going, but nobody saw him on the floors. I said, look, I saw a strange fellow on this floor. I saw a strange fellow there. Nobody saw anybody. Except for the cleaning lady who says, I saw him killing her. And then you have to wonder, does Edna know what she saw? Did Edna even see that? Is it possible Edna heard about the crime after the fact and just said, oh, I saw him, he was in there doing this? However, she did say he's strangling her, which is true. So the other question is where, I would love to see the actual room. I showed you some of the pictures, but the pictures are very hard to see how big. It's supposed to be a small office. But again, where was he attacking her? Because if she could see him strangling her, it wasn't behind the desk, which would be more secluded. It would be on the side of the desk or in front of the desk, in front of the door. It's just extraordinarily odd. Let's see, Loretta. It seems like someone who would burgle, tape, and murder. Okay, he didn't tape. He took a cord, I think, and put it around her arms. Would have other crimes. You would think. And the DNA and record so that he left the country. So maybe he left the country. Possible. I mean, it's possible. However, here's some more information. So they did the DNA and came up. So now they're doing familial DNA, and this is Detective Nelson. He's still like gung ho on this. They've got one woman, and if you listen to this whole podcast, you'll see the DNA lady will talk about this too. They have him the DNA matched to somewhere between a second and fourth cousin. I'm leaning toward the fourth cousin. He is of African descent, so probably West African. So is my ex-husband. He's from Jamaica, and my kids come up with a certain percentage of DNA from Ghana, Togo. What else? Not Nigeria for some reason. But sort of in the area, Ivory Coast. So West Africa, the slave trade days. So they have a percentage that comes up that way because that's where the DNA would go back to. So DNA in the United States, if a person is Black in this country, in the United States, African American, usually it goes back to Africa at some point. Now, I don't know if it's 100% or 80%, because usually everybody in this country is mixed to some extent. But in other words, they do believe the suspect was Black. Okay. They supposedly, in spite of knowing that, they did not just only DNA Black people. Even according to her, she said the guy was Black, which by the way, would make sense in Prince George's County. We're a heavily African American county. Caucasian people are a minority here, and so that would make sense. I mean, it just demographically, it would make sense. So the community that Cheverly is in is almost 100% African American. And also, just to be culturally honest about that, I mean, there's a lot of jobs in hospitals that are not high-paying jobs. The cleaning work and the food preparation and stuff like that, orderly work, and that gets a lot of people who don't have higher education in this particular area. Then we have more African Americans who fit that description as far as work goes. So yes. That he would be black is not surprising. But they did DNA to white guys too, so I have to give them credit for that, because they could, at that time, they didn't actually. They had her description, he was black, but they didn't have the DNA at that point proving anything. But now they do, and does prove he's black. So now they're looking for those fourth cousins. So if they can ever find the fourth cousins, they may be able to start coming closer and closer and closer to who he is. Now, does that mean he talk about leaving the country? That's possible. Okay, so I married my husband, my ex, in 1979. He was from Jamaica. His mother worked as housekeeping in a hospital. And let's assume okay, where were we living at that time? Okay, so they already have our name for the hospital. As far as I know, my ex-husband was not at that hospital that day. But I will also admit he works on MRI machines. He worked for Siemens Medical System, so he does works on MRIs, CAT scans. He works on all the machines. He fixes all of them, and does very well at it. So he used to work for Siemens. He doesn't work for them now. He's not retired yet, but has a great job. And so he would go from hospital to hospital, which had Siemens equipment. So in theory, so the police show up at his house. No, honey, you didn't do it. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter about the divorce. But he did go from hospital to hospital. So he was a lot of times when he worked on the machines, he would work on the machines after hours. Why? Because people weren't using the machines, and they would be in there. So most of the time it was during the day. I'm trying to remember. Most of the time he came home in the evening. So I take that back. Most of the time it was during the day. But so you have contractors who also come to the hospitals. Tons of contractors coming and going, bringing in food items, bringing in medical equipment, working on medical equipment. So we lived in the area, 50 minutes from that hospital. We knew people that worked in the hospital. I worked as a sign language interpreter. He worked fixing equipment in the hospital. He's black. So going on your theory, so my ex is over there and he commits a horrifying crime. And then he could have, theoretically, because he originates from Jamaica, he could have split and gone back to Jamaica knowing he was in trouble. Got on a plane and went back to the country he came from. Yeah, you're right. Then his DNA would never be found in the bank, because he never committed another crime, and he wasn't going to commit another crime in the United States. Now, he's got 5 brothers and sisters. If one of them commits a crime, or they got their stuff in a DNA bank, they could come up with his brother or his cousins or any of those people as having a match to him, familial match. Then they could hone in on him and find out, hey, maybe it's this guy. He ran the country, and he worked for that company, and he was at the hospital that day. Then they might finally have their guy. Except it's not him. He didn't leave the country. He lives in California. And he's not a criminal. But the way you pointed out is good. I wanted to give a description of how that could be. So this is a possibility that the guy who committed the crime was not what is known as an African American. It could have been a black person who was Jamaican. Could have been Haitian. Could have been Dominican. lots of countries. Bahamian, it could have been a Bahamian, could have been an African, could have been somebody from Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon. There wasn't as high a immigrant population, black immigrant population, in 1998 as it is now. But hey, again, my husband was here. I married him in 1979. His whole family was here, so they came in. They came in. I'm not quite sure now. This early 70s, I think they showed up. He came when he was 15, and then so yeah. I think that was a good investigative idea. Very much could be the truth about that, and therefore, how are you going to find the person? She said he was also graying on top, which is interesting. I don't know if that's true or not. Again, it could be the light hitting. See, this is where it gets so the witness identification is always questionable. But she was telling the truth about seeing the guy. She had the fact that he was black correct, because that came up in the genetics on the DNA. So that at least supports that. Past that, I don't know. Is Pat lagging, or is it my internet? Oh my God, I hope it's not me. Am I lagging? Oh no, don't tell me I did this. Oh my God, I did do that. Have I been lagging through the whole show? I accidentally left. I'm linked in, but accidentally left the internet on as well. And I don't know if that screwed up the whole thing. No good. Last time I accidentally did that, it ended up blurring out my entire show. I forgot. I was rushing back from the from the restaurant, and we stayed longer. Okay, well, I don't know what's going to end up looking like, because that's not supposed to be. It does some conflict thing, and I did the show the other day, and I put the video up, and I had no idea it was a complete mess. Well, Harpa, I did have the other one on, which can cause interference. So thank you for telling me. The Ouija poo poo, I like that, and a black cat to boot. The fact she came across the attack but couldn't comprehend what was happening was so tragic. Yeah, that is a good way to put it. It does seem that she's telling the truth, that she came across the attack, and she may even be describing everything properly, but I don't think she could have stopped the attack. So let's put it that way. She couldn't stop it. And she was also possibly correct that the guy could have killed her. And she was probably dead before she had called for help. He was already strangling her. She would have been dead. Could they have caught the guy? They couldn't have saved her life. I don't think they would have saved her life, but they could have caught the guy, maybe. But the security was so bad there, maybe they wouldn't have caught the guy, because it really was bad. Well, we don't know that she was there for 5 minutes. That, again, is questionable. She went to call a phone and then didn't. I think, the issue of shock and perception can be very confusing for people. When they see something, she said this interesting thing in her interview. She goes, I'm alone. She likes being alone. She's always alone. And she doesn't understand other things outside of being by herself. She didn't understand what was happening there, because she didn't understand people terribly well. And if that's true, she came across something she was unable to put two and two together, at least not quick enough. And I don't know that she even she was unsure. And then people, when they're unsure, they're afraid to make moves. And so, yeah, I don't think it would have saved Sherry Crandell's life. I just think it's possible they could have at least caught the guy. But again, security was dreadful there. So this is if he was actually wearing a lab coat or something that looked like a lab coat, I can see where she thought initially that he was like maybe maybe doing CPR. Maybe, she's not a nurse. She's not a doctor. She could have, just not comprehended. Actually, no. And that's possible too. They didn't say what slow meant, just that whatever. Well, that's an answer we do not know. We don't know. And the question is, was he in the office in the dark? Did you come in and turn the light on? And then there he was. I mean, going from being a petty thief. Now, we're not talking about a burglar. Let me just go difference between a burglar and a petty thief. A petty thief. The guy made me taking a television off the wall. It sounds like a burglary thing, but petty thieves a lot of times will grab things that are easy. Yeah, they might be in somebody's office and say, "Hey, I see a phone." They may see a computer in somebody's office and decide that if they walk by later, and nobody's around, they can just grab that computer, laptop. I don't know, 1998. What do we have? I can't remember what we had in 1998. Um, Stealing a bicycle, laying against a fence, petty theft type thing. Burglary is kind of a different whole thing, a whole different kind of mindset. You have to break into somebody's house. That house is a private location, not a public location where you could just grab something. You're talking about a private location. You have to make a plan to actually get into that person's private space, into their home. And that is an invasion, very much of an invasion, whether it be a home invasion type thing or a sexual invasion type thing. It's an invasion, and it's a whole different way of thinking, shall we say. And that's why burglars are often connected to sexual predators as well. And that's why you'll see sometimes that prior to the pre-rape type of behaviors, where the guy's peeping Tom, that again is going to somebody's private space by peeping into their windows and looking at them in their private moments. Then you have the guys who go into the house and steal somebody's underwear. Or there's one guy who used to put bubble gum in women's underwear. You go into the drawer and you take the bubble gum and stick it in the crotch of the underwear and put it back in the drawer. And then the girl goes, this is so creepy. When you think how creeped out you would be. So here you are in your apartment, in your house, you're getting dressed one morning, you pick up your underwear, your panties, and you go to put them on, and there's gum in them. You have to be so creeped out because, first of all, it's a creepy thing to do, period. But somebody was in your house, in your underwear drawer, doing that. That has to be creepy. So that guy's getting a big, cheap thrill out of the invasion of your personal space and the humiliation and fear you have all wrapped into it, similar to rape. That's why a lot of these guys go from that to then sexual assault. So burglary, invading people's private space, is highly connected to sexual homicides. But petty crime, not so much. So in theory, if the guy works there, let's say he works there, he's done, again, somebody who does, let's say there's a guy who's doing some carpentry work there, some painting, might have been painting in the hospital, and he just sees an opportunity to grab some stuff. It's, he's not necessarily threatening anybody's lives. He's not really going to their private space, except, it's annoying if they go into your purse or, into your drawer in your office to take your stuff. It's a little bit, but not the same thing as going into somebody's home. So is that the same guy that is going to then commit carrying a knife with him, a violent sexual homicide? Was this what remember, he held a knife to her throat, he raped her, he tied her up. I don't know if he tied her up and then raped her or raped. I don't have the details of that. He may not have brought what he tied her up with, but hey, it's an office. He got lots of goodies in that office. So it isn't that he didn't know there was stuff in the office, and that may be a reason he didn't need to bring it. If he had his knife with him, he already knew there was stuff he could tie somebody up with. So it's hard to know whether he went there with specific purpose to sexually assault her. And maybe after he finished killing her, he just said, I'm going to see if she's got any money here. Might as well take that. I personally lean toward this is sexual homicide first. And if he took anything afterwards, it was just because it amused him and he thought he'd grab some stuff. I don't see that. I find it very hard to believe that somebody came in there just to steal little things from the office and escalated to that. Could have. I can't prove it. But that's why I would look at this. It seemed like he was very capable in the sexual assault. So my belief is he had to have committed sexual assaults prior to this. But yet he's not coming up in CODIS. But that doesn't mean he was ever caught. And that's the question. Did he not leave semen in another scene? Did he commit other kinds of sexual assaults that didn't include leaving DNA? Don't know. And I bet Detective Nelson wishes he knew. Well, there's a good reason for that. But that's a good point. Why he had a knife, he had to choose to strangle. Most of them prefer strangling. Strangling's more fun. Knifing people and cutting their throat causes a lot of bleeding. You're gonna get blood flailing out of them, gushing out of them. You get full of blood. So using a knife on somebody for killing them is a lot messier than strangling them. So putting a knife next to her neck and saying, "I'll cut your throat if you don't cooperate," the little bit that he scratched her up with is not going to be enough to cause you not to be able to walk out of the hospital. But so you strangle them because that way he could walk away with his clean outfit. Now, also, who knows, that little lab coat might have been his little protection, that he could then take the lab coat off and wipe off the knife. He could throw the lab coat away, although they've never found the lab coat or the knife. But yeah, strangling, it causes a lot less mess. So I would go with that if I were him. Benny says, Pat, if she was targeted specifically, he would have to be a local med person working at the hospital who knew her, as her office was rather secluded. Yeah, you'd think. Yeah, that's why I think my guess is I think Detective Nelson, he's probably gone back and forth like a ping pong ball between the guy who was just in there to steal something and then was opportunistic, or the guy who actually did target her. So it has to be somebody who knows that she's in the hospital. And this is where crimes get very difficult. And you can pull any FBI profiler out here and say, what was his motive? And if that profiler comes up with a big long 2 or 3 paragraph motive, he's just making it up because he has no clue. This is where it gets very, very tricky. So you get. I'm very careful. I don't do that kind of profiling because I think it's nonsense. I'd have to be making it up because I don't know. I can look at this crime and now, mind you, I don't have the inside track on this one. All right. Much as I have these weird connections to this case, I don't have the inside track. I've never seen Detective Nelson's files. I'd love to. I'd like to review everything. I'd be curious, but he has done so. I have not. He may know something about what the guy did in the office, how he did things. He may know more things than I do. And maybe if I knew more than I do, I could say, I clearly believe this guy was an opportunistic guy. He was there to steal and he just ran into her. Or I could say it's a revenge crime because he's pissed off about the security. She said stuff about the security thing. How dare she do that? And sometimes when people commit some kind of revenge crime, sexual assault goes nicely with that. Or is he just a straight up serial killer who knew he knew how he was in there. He saw her, she was going to work late. And he's like, yeah, I can take advantage of that. Serial killers are opportunistic too in many ways, but so it gets very cloudy. And don't let if you're going into profiling or whatever, please stay away from profiling something you can't profile to that degree. All I can say is this: what he did, the fact he had the ability to think this through, to tie her up, to put the knife to her throat, to threaten her, to rape her, and to murder her like that, very cold-bloodedly, and obviously without highly amount of any kind of major panic. Because if according to Edna, she's telling the truth, that guy was doing what he was doing. That's a psychopath, and is a psychopath who seems to be capable. So I would say the guy has experience in some way or some fashion. He seems to have. This isn't a first-time crime. I don't believe that. But whether he's ever caught for another crime, clearly he was not. And his DNA is not in any bank. But maybe there wasn't DNA in another crime. He could have still committed a sexual homicide, but not left DNA in another crime. Or they didn't do good. It could have been earlier, and they didn't do good collection tech thing. It could have been she was in a river or something, and there wasn't any DNA. Who knows? But so you don't. So when you're going to look at profiling, you got to be very careful not to over profile and start saying things that you cannot support with the evidence. If I can't support it with the evidence, I'm not going to go there. So the motive to me Original motive, later motive, multiple motives? I just don't know. Um, uh, well, there's one white guy with a blue truck and works in construction. And you can say things likely works in the medical industry. Could have, and then they'll sometimes sometimes I'll give 3 or 4 different possibilities. He might have been. He could be in housekeeping or in kitchen work, or he could have been. You can just add at least 4 or 5 things in there, and then one of them, your chances are like pretty good that you're going to hit one of them. Like 80% chance you'll be right. I don't know. As I point out, there's so many different people that could work in a hospital, from contractors, which come from the outside, to emergency support teams like EMTs and firefighters and medical sign language interpreters. I said I've been in a hospital all night long. Could I have accessed that area of the hospital when I was at PG Hospital? I sometimes worked all night long. I stayed with. I had like a whole night show, or I came into the emergency room. Let's say I came to the emergency room at 5 in the afternoon, and we're in the emergency room till 1 in the morning. Then they admit the patient into the hospital. I'm still there. It's been 8 hours, but they're like, "Hey, Pat, can you stay there till morning because we can't find anybody else?" Okay. So then I do work 12 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours, sometimes many, many hours. And so I was in hospital all night long. I can walk right out of that part of the hospital, and I can wander all over the hospital. I can wander right into the 4th floor into that spot. Good. So that's how many people. It's like a city inside a hospital, a very poorly secured city. So, yeah. If what Edna says is true, he had graying hair, so maybe he was active when DNA wasn't looked at. Well, that's a very good thought, and never got his DNA in the database. That is very good. Now, they were already taking DNA. Let's see. I know the 1990 crime that I was concerned about, their DNA was taken then. I forget exactly when DNA started being exactly handled. I said in one of my other ones, I always forget the dates. I'm not good on dates. I could look it up. But yeah, this would be at least a decade that he would have had not to be committing a crime. But maybe he didn't commit a crime in a decade, or maybe he committed the crime and saying didn't leave DNA. Or maybe he used a condom and forgot his condoms. It's hard to say. Oh, interesting. Yes, old ER nurse here. Never thought about how easy the access is. It's incredibly easy. It's gotten a lot better. There are certain hospitals which, at least to get in the door of, I've had to show IDs now. I have to go to security, like Washington Hospital, GW, George Washington Hospital Center. The main one, you come in, there's a guard desk right there. You must show your ID, and they're gonna write your name down and give you your thing. And they have to say where you're going. And then the emergency room, you come in there and you have to do the same thing. And you have to say where you're going. And oftentimes when I came there, I say, look, I got to go up to the 3rd floor to sign in, and then I'll be back. And they say, no problem. And they hit the door and they open the door for me. And I go through the door, and then I walk all over the hospital and I go to the 3rd floor, which is an administrative area. And I just walk in and I sign the book. And there's usually one person working in that office in the middle of the night. Totally open, no security on the floor. And I'm walking around. So yeah, the question is, how much security can you have any place? It's one of those situations where it's not like women were being raped right and left in PG Hospital. They weren't. This was an anomaly and freaked everybody out. So is it one of those things that would just happen no matter what? Also, when you leave PG Hospital, there's no security in the garage. There's no security when I was walking across to where my car was parked in the emergency lot. There's no security for visitors. I don't know how many. Most of the hospitals I go to, I'm walking through the dark in the middle of the night. I worked at a DC General, which was in Southeast DC, no longer exists. When I went into that emergency room, I know a good portion of the people in the emergency room were packing. I mean, there were gangbangers in there, you know. I mean, they had guns on them. There was no metal detector. You just knew they were armed. He was like, I hope they don't get pissed off at each other while I'm here. Um, yeah, I'm going through all the different hospitals I've ever worked at to see which ones have better security. But going in and out, you definitely get killed because bad people are everywhere. So, oh, that's interesting. Allison says, I was nursing in the 1970s as a young 20-year-old in an old Victorian hospital, and at night it was completely open. Anyone could walk in. Yeah. I could. Remember the Sandra Cantu case? Melissa Huckabee? Mm-hmm. Church lady. She sexually assaulted and murdered a little girl. So, hey, don't give me a break. That's an interesting point. The perp may have cased other hospitals, and this one won the easy prize. Interesting thing to point out on that. I like that. There are people who hospital shop, and what they're doing, especially if they're going in to get Percocet, for example. You like Percocet, and the one of my clients, he claimed he had sickle cell. He didn't have sickle cell. His friend had sickle cell. He didn't, but he learned all the techniques to what he should sound like, and he would just lay there in agonizing pain, and the doctors would come in and say, "What's wrong?" So, sickle cell. I'm a lot of pain. And I need my medicine. And the doctor would walk out and he'd go, "Hey, what's up, Pat?" And then the doctor would walk back and he'd go, "Hey," and he would just, again. But he got the Percocet and then he'd sell it on the street. So he did hospital jumping because you can't keep going back to the same hospital because that doctor might show up again and start getting the picture, So as long as you have ways to get around to different hospitals and you're in a city area, you could jump from hospital to hospital to hospital. And this one was one of the hospitals you went to that have very lax security. So that's possible. Yep. Let's see. Hope Bajaz says, having worked in hospitals, everyone that works there knows everything. Which cameras work? Oh my God. Yeah. One of the best things we have now is camera systems that actually do function. But, some of the camera systems weren't that good back in the day, as I say, back in the day, whatever day that is. But, like my house, we got cameras everywhere here. My daughter, was just in Italy, and she could just look on her phone and see whether there was, Amazon guy's coming. She could see the Amazon guy coming up to the door and putting the packages on the step, So, and she can do that from Italy. So now there are a lot more camera systems out there, except sometimes when you want them, for some reason they don't exist. It's like, does nobody have a Ring camera on the street? But so theoretically, every hospital, it would be useful if there was at least all the halls had cameras on them. Now, in private locations, you don't want cameras. But at least you could see who's coming and going into those private locations, who's coming in through a side door somebody coming in from the parking garage. Of course, it's more difficult today because once upon a time nobody wore masks, and now everybody wears masks and nobody questions it. So therefore, it's a lot easier to cover yourself up. But at least you'd have something to go on. And you could, if you have a proper person sitting there watching all the cameras, you can see somebody coming in who shouldn't be in a certain area, and you could send security down if you'd hired enough security people. So a lot of times they just don't hire enough people. And then you got to make sure the security guard you hire isn't the serial killer himself, which he could be. So that's a problem. That's interesting. Carla says, when my grandma was dying, family members took turns at her bedside 24/7. Those are good family members. After midnight, only one door open. If I wore civvies, I was stopped and questioned. If I wore white, I breezed right through. Yeah. Interesting. Well, this case is scaring me. A hospital should be safe. Well, you're more likely to die in the hospital of a medical mistake than you are from being murdered. And that is, unfortunately, the truth. I was just going to bed. Night, night. Let's see. Uh, do you think if a woman fights back, the perp would end her life? Uh, it all depends. It's one of those things that nobody who's dead can tell you what they did. So you have a woman who fights back and the guy gives up and leaves or lets her live. And she says, see, it was because I fought. Then you have the woman who says, well, I told the guy um, that I have two little girls at home who need me desperately. And please don't hurt me anymore. Don't kill me because my two little girls need their mother. And he lets her go. She goes, see, it's because I reached out to him and I struck something in him, something human in him. Then you have those who say, well, I told the guy I had HIV, syphilis, and I was on my period, and he decided not to have sex with me. He decided not to rape me. So that worked because he thought, oh, we're going to get a disease. Now, is that really the reason those three women lived, or was it because they were going to live anyway? Because there might be a whole bunch of women who said those exact same words to the guy, and he's like, yeah, I don't care. Would I say fight? In those circumstances, you see, I hate to recommend anything because if you have a chance of fighting and getting a moment you can escape, I'd fight. Do you think that if you just it doesn't kill you in the next 30 minutes, somebody might come by and save you because it's a highly trafficked area and might bide your time? Maybe that would work. Maybe if he just quote wants to rape you, but it all depends also whether you've seen his face. And when I was doing the Ireland, the Vanishing Triangle, one of the women knew was that she survived, but only because she was majorly lucky. But the guy is telling her his own story. She'd seen his face. He had kidnapped her. She had seen his face. He was telling her details about his family, and she knew. There's no way he could let her live because she could rat him out in a heartbeat. And so once that happens, you better fight because that's all you got left. But try not to get in those situations. It's not a good thing. Try to avoid them. And then, of course, people would say, maybe he only attacked her because she caught him stealing stuff. I would believe that without the sexual assault. The sexual assault is what changes everything. Well, that's true too. That's a good point. I was saying, if he has blood on his the lab coat, would anybody really care? That's a good place. I feel like a hospital is the easiest place to get away with having some blood on you. That sure is easier than other places. That is very, very true. Very good, Stephanie. Also, one of the other places, which is why I thought Jack the Ripper may well be a butcher, is because one of the suspects was a butcher. And if you see a butcher with a white coat and blood on it, it's because he's a butcher. And as a matter of fact, if you find body parts back at his place, you'll assume they're animal body parts and not human body parts. If he has so a butcher is another place. Good place for bloody stuff. Let's see. That's also a good point. That's a good point, Carl. I didn't get to that. So that's a good point. Why do I think his DNA match never came up? If he was a sexual killer, aka serial killer, would he not have kept offending? In theory, yes. In the theory, he may have offended. And in the theory, he could still offend because if you enjoy doing it, you want to do it again. How often they do it is often questionable. Some people think it's every month. And sometimes some guys are very prolific, but other guys only every couple of years or so. When they're having bad moments in their life, they go out and do it again. And they lay low when they're in trouble, when they think the police will find them. So it is possible, you're quite correct, that he committed this crime and it became huge news with the DNA, dragnet, and all that stuff. It was like, blew up on him, you know what I mean? So he's like, boy, that DNA really screwed me, and that fingerprint. So, yeah. Did he get more careful and start wearing gloves and condoms? Very well may be true. Absolutely. I didn't mention that. And I'm glad you did, because yes, that may be why they keep looking for him. At this point, he hasn't screwed up in that sense anymore. So he is making sure that he doesn't leave because he would definitely learn about DNA and fingerprints on that one crime. So yes, so he could be out there reoffending and reoffending and reoffending. So that's why the familial thing is going to be really good, the genetic stuff, because if they can identify him at some point, let's say they finally get from the fourth cousin to the fourth cousin is, I don't know where the fourth cousin is at. I don't understand quite how it works, but okay, you're down to third cousin, two cousin, whatever. And that person says, well, my family is from, and they point out their family is from that family, the extended relatives part of the family. Their cousins are from the Cheverly area of Prince George's County. And so you go now check those out, and it turns out that one of them worked at Prince George's Hospital in 1998. He was one of the original suspects, but he didn't give DNA, but they excluded him for some reason. Or he was a contractor, came in and went back out again. And he's working for a contract company, had contracts with him. And then they go and they get his DNA, and now it does match because, yeah, they wait till he goes to the McDonald's and sips out of a cup and chucks the cup, and they snatch the cup out of the trash, and turns out to be a match. I think that's what they're aiming for at this point, that if the guy's still here, and if they can narrow it, they're here right now. And now it's gotten more like this. So the detective wants to get, and with his DNA expert, wants to keep getting it down till maybe they can identify some people who could be connected to the murder of Sherry Crandell, and eventually narrow it down to the one guy and get his DNA, and then bingo, they finally got him after all these years. But I hope the detective has some luck, because I know he might want to retire. He can retire now. He's already done his years. He can retire. I'm sure Prince George's loves to keep him on, because they're losing too many. They're losing too many officers these days and having trouble hiring new people. So if they can get any of their officers, especially seasoned detectives, to stay on, they're thrilled. They might be saying, hope they don't figure out who killed her. He'll retire. But I think that he's going to hang in for quite a while. He's not that old yet. He probably can, he can do a few more years, as long as he's, up to it, So let's see. Nothing like that. I mean, there's been sexual homicides. Oh my God, since 1998, sure, sexual homicides in the area. The question comes down to is that just because she was raped and murdered in a hospital doesn't mean that other people have to be raped and murdered in hospitals. The guys' MOs do not stay that exactly the same. So it's always possible that, let's say, 2 years later, not in Cheverly, Maryland, but in Annapolis, Maryland, which is not that far away, 25 minutes, 20 minutes, a woman is found murdered in an office building, raped and murdered. Is that the same guy? What about a woman is raped and murdered in her home? What about if a woman is raped and murdered in the bushes? And you look at the Maryland map, and maybe here, this guy may have been living here, and then he loses his job or whatever, or gets a new girlfriend, and she says, hey, move over to my place. And he moves. Maybe he's in Virginia. Virginia and Maryland are right next door to each other. So there could be a sexual homicide in Virginia. They'd never have a clue that is connected to this crime. Why would they? So unless the DNA matches, just because another woman got strangled, it doesn't tell you a lot. That's the problem. Her age is unusual. And I pointed out again, that's unusual. Because generally speaking, if you look at most of the women that are getting raped, sexual homicides, they're usually much younger. But sometimes you get very elderly, and that's usually a teenager, because elderly people are easier to kill and control. And they live next door when you don't have a car, so you can just walk down the street. Then you do get a few people in varying age groups, but they tend toward the younger side for sexual homicides. Oftentimes when I see a woman who's not sexually assaulted but murdered, and she is, shall we say, overweight, I usually say, well, it's probably not a serial killer. It's probably a boyfriend or somebody who knows her. And it usually turns out to be that. So this is unusual that, because she's 50 and overweight. I mean, I'm not exactly the top choice for serial killers either right now. It's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean maybe there's all kinds of weird possibilities. You never know these things. Like, let's say, I don't know how old her assistant was and what she looked like. So let's say the guy was up there and heard the assistant say, "Are you working late?" And he saw the assistant in that office, and the assistant was younger. He said, "I'll come back and get her." He gets there, the assistant's not there, but it's Sherry Crandell. He's like, "Oh well, okay, you know, I still want to have a good time," in his opinion. So it's hard to say. It really is. Again, trying to get inside the mind of a killer is not something you're really actually going to be able to do. I can tell you how serial killers sometimes think. In a general sort, I can tell you how psychopaths can think, how this kind of thing, but I can't tell you what that exact one thought that at that exact moment. If I say I can, I'm lying. So yes, yeah, it's true. I had this one picture of a very, very large woman, and I'm like, she's safe. And I say the same thing over and over again. And people think, oh, this is a terrible thing to say. But it's true. If you got a woman who's 400 pounds, wanting to get her weight off, she's walking down the bike path and she's trying to get thinner, she's trying to get healthy. The guy doesn't want to attack her because the jeans are hard to remove. The body is hard to pull and she can't fit in the trunk of his car. I mean, it's a reality. So, if you have a choice, it's just you go for the 120-pound girl, 110 pounds. Much easier to deal with. You also don't go for the 6'2" woman who is an MMA champion, because she will beat you, because she's strong. You don't go for a person who is going to give you trouble if you can avoid that. So, yeah. You can't win no matter what. We can't win. Lord, can't win. I just know I need to be thinner than I am, because I did gain a lot of weight during COVID. I'm doing a bad job of getting rid of it. And I'm not taking Ozem, whatever that is. I'm not touching any drugs, so it'll take me a lot longer. I don't think hospital staff walk around with blood on their clothes nowadays. Well, usually not very long. I mean, it's not, they don't want them to walk around the hospital looking that way. So usually when they end up with blood on the clothes, they switch out the clothing very quickly, and they're usually covered and they're better covered. I don't remember seeing a whole lot of blood in the hospital, as far as nurses and doctors and whatever walking around, looking like they slaughtered somebody. Now, in the emergency room, you see it a lot more, because you get people in the emergency situations who are bleeding heavily and spurting blood and stuff. So you will definitely see more people get, and that's what people were worried about during especially during AIDS, the AIDS epidemic type thing. And when there was very little treatment, the big fear was that if you were working in a hospital, not only could you cut yourself, but if you cut yourself and their blood got on you, then you were in trouble. Or if the blood spurted, you could, be concerned that you might have a problem. So but yeah, generally speaking, they don't want you walking around the hallways that way. It's kind of gives a hospital a bad name. Winter weight, know it well. Who funds the hospitals in the USA? I don't know. I'm a profiler. I'm not an economics person. Who'd be responsible for security? Well, that would be. It's okay that you're in the UK. I don't know. Even here, I would say that from what I know, the hospitals themselves are big corporations, so they're responsible for what they do there. They're responsible for. They're hooked up with the insurance scam. I mean, our system sucks, but pretty much everybody's does. Can't find a really good one, no matter what happens. But yeah, so they decide how much security they need. It's the same thing with sign language interpreting. They once upon a time didn't give sign language interpreters to anybody, and so they got sued because people couldn't understand, the deaf person couldn't understand the doctor. So then they got sued, and then there became a movement to that they had to be providing interpreters. So then it got really good, where they had to fork out that cash to have an interpreter, physically come into the hospital and stay with that patient 100% of the time. And it did cost a lot of money. And then during COVID, they banned all the interpreters from the hospital and put them all on video. And then they realized they could save a crap load of money, because then they could claim, well, we can't get the interpreter there in person, but as soon as you're going to talk to the doctor, we'll hook up the machine. So what would happen is they would have to suffer through trying to write notes to the nurses again, and all this in between stuff. They had nobody to help them. Going down to x-ray, nobody to help them. It was very, very, very frustrating. And then when the doctor comes in, they get the video thing started, which is sometimes good and sometimes difficult. And then as soon as the doctor walked out, they just turn off the video. So they only paid for the exact amount of minutes the video was running. But if I come to the hospital as a sign language interpreter, and I'm there, let's say I come at 9 at night, and that person doesn't get seen until 9 in the morning, I would spend 12 hours in the waiting room with them. And before they even saw the doctor. It worked out great for me. I was getting 12 hours just to have a chit chat with them. They'd fall asleep. I'd read a book. I'd watch a movie. I'd study. I'd write. I mean, it was great. I got paid to work essentially on something else. I got paid to work on this, but I was really doing other stuff. And then eventually the person would get into the room, and then I'd interpret, and the doctors and all that would come in. And I would be with them until they were released from the hospital, which could be 16, 17, 18 hours later, sometimes 24. And if they got admitted to the hospital, I would stay with them until the new interpreter came in, and the new interpreter would stay for the next 12-hour shift, and then they do 12-hour shifts for all the interpreters. And that deaf person was in the hospital for 2 months. They had an interpreter 24 hours a day with them. That cost a fortune. Now they're going to video, so when the patient's asleep now, nobody's getting paid. So that's why the interpreting industry it's going to need it's kind of crashing and burning for sign language interpreters. But they'll pay as much money as they think they have to. So security is the same thing. They have to find the ways they can to cover the security issues as financially in a way that they think is necessary. How many cameras do we put in? How many guards do we need? What are our systems going to be? And this hospital, PG Hospital, was very, very lax until she got killed. And then they ramped it up a wee bit, because now everybody was all over them saying, hey, you can't have lack of security like this. And I don't think I've heard of another murder in the hospital since. So it could have just been an anomaly, or the security could be working. I have no idea. So, yeah. So anyway, let me see. I want to see if there's anything else I wanted to say here. Just to point out that, again, just to review the notes I took from the show. She was last seen alive carrying a can of soda from the cafeteria between 5:30 and 6. So the cafeteria was open till at least 6. I don't know when it closed in those days, but that means probably at least till she was murdered. There were kitchen staff was there, because there are obviously lots of work to do. 6:30, she sent a message from her office. Last message sent. Seen working in the office. A housekeeper and a trainee saw Sherry working between 7:15 and 7:30. She was murdered between 7:30 and 9 p.m. That's what they know. But and let's see. Yeah, so the man who found her, his name was Fred Reynolds. He was on the cleaning crew. Let's see. Said here, it's hard to say if she was raped prior or after she was tied up. I guess it depends how she was tied up. There were some knife wounds to the neck, soft tissue wounds. That's, again, putting the knife to the neck, possibly holding the knife to the neck while raping her, then put on her floor and choked out. The fingerprint came from the cord that was used to tie her up. So here, so there were witnesses. That was 2 members of the cleaning crew had seen her working, and a third one had seen her being strangled. So see, there were 3 people on that crew. So Edna Brown was the one who saw it. She was 54 years old. And they tried to hypnotize her. I don't know if that worked out. They pointed out how the reason they thought she was a little slow was because they had one man that kind of stood out, and they thought maybe this is the guy. And they said, do you recognize the guy? And she goes, well, I only saw him from the side. So she took the photo and went like this. So So maybe she's a little slow, was a little slow. The family health center closed, is in the main hospital. So anybody could have also been in the hospital and never left. They could have been there during the day, closed at 5 o'clock at the family health center, but they could have been lurking around any place in the hospital. Says stairway, the elevator from the lobby, they could use those, could come in through the entrance connected to the parking garage on the fourth floor. Yes, it was the fourth floor. You had to go out on the fourth floor. I remember that. Easy to get onto the fourth floor and easy to get out. Yep. And then you come from the garage, you walk down a long hallway. Well, that's true, but most of the time I'm in that hallway by myself. So yeah. Then there was a waiting room and an examination room. Her office was off in an administrative area. She also had a wristband with a whistle attached, and nobody knew about that. And apparently she didn't blow it. So there you go. So let's see. Justice said there's a lot of people coming out in and out of the hospital. Homeless people, doors to stairway. Oh, doors to the stairwell. Some of them had tape over the latches. So there you go too. So somebody goes out, puts the tape on it, closes the door, comes right back in a little bit later. So, but sometimes people were looking for places to sleep, and true that they wanted to come back and steal stuff too. So that's also possible. Yeah. So that is pretty much where it's at. And so to profile a crime like this, I mean, all one can say is he's a psychopath, because that's true. You can't commit a sexual homicide and not be one. So that is known. That he is black is proven by DNA now, not just the witness. But I think everything else is just up in the air, and you can't get further than that. People want profiling to be some, again, magical thing. If how would I say anything? Like, for example, let's say we didn't know his age. Now, of course, Edna is saying the guy was in his 40s. Why? If I were a profiler and I was the FBI, the way they do their profiling, and saying, well, how old do you think the guy was? Would you say 40 because she's 50? Why would you say 40? Because, as I pointed out, sometimes very young kids, teenagers, will once kill the 80-year-olds. So where do you come up with the age? I would have no idea. So a lot of times the FBI will come up in the age of, well, most crimes are committed by guys between the age of 25 and 35. So they'll just chuck that out there. And then if the guy's 38, they'll go, see, it was close. If the person's 48, then they just don't usually put out a profile to the public. So therefore they can't be proven wrong. But what are you going to say? How would we know how would a profile know what kind of work he does from that crime scene? I have no clue. Who he lives with, that he can't get along with women. He's got problems with women. Okay, I could say that. How can I tell whether he's married or he's not? I mean, none of this stuff you can tell by crime scene. This is a lot of nonsensical stuff that you can say things, and as long as you never catch the guy, you'll never be wrong. But this crime is one of those crimes where I can sometimes look at all the evidence and I can say this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Therefore, yes, I think this guy's this race. I think he's this age. I think this is kind of work I'll be looking, all because that's in the crime scene itself. But this crime scene, it's just, I can't tell you if he works in the hospital or he doesn't. It seems like it makes sense he might work in the hospital. But why doesn't he know about the cleaning crews? Why would you leave the door open if Edna saw what she said she saw? What was there to steal in her office that was really worth stealing? And I don't know. So I've probably got no more clue than anybody else. So my profiling stuff doesn't really help me. So this is one of these things where, there are crimes where somebody says, come in and take a look at this and see what you can tell us. And I come in and say, I can't tell you any more than you already know. Now, I'm not saying I couldn't. And maybe if I would look at all the paperwork and I saw all these little details, I'd go, okay, well, now I got something to work with. And this is a guy you should be looking at. Why aren't you looking at this guy? I might be able to do that if I were on the inside, but I'm not. So I'm assuming Detective Nelson, who has worked his little buns off on this case, has has some reason why he can't find this guy and is hoping that DNA will do it. So it must be just that difficult. Sometimes it's that difficult. Um, well, again, we don't know this is true. This is the problem with witnesses. We don't even know if she saw it correctly. Maybe she saw, maybe the blue, maybe it wasn't a stethoscope. She saw something blue. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe she saw a guy that looked like that later on. She's slow and decided to take the clothing that she saw on this guy. Maybe she saw the people from the ER race up and go in the room, and she looks back in the room. She sees the guy with the lab coat and the stethoscope who really is trying to save her life, and she conflates it with what she thought she saw. Is it possible she never even saw anybody in that room? Maybe she heard a scream and ran away. And now after she saw the I don't know where she exactly was when the staff from the hospital rolled in and tried to save her. I don't know where she was when the other cleaning staff came in. If she was nowhere around, then that wouldn't influence her. But if she was, that might influence her. So the problem is we just don't know. So that's why I would take that witness sighting with extreme grain of salt. That's why they still looked at white guys. Because although she said the guy was black, maybe he wasn't. I also don't know the lighting situation in the room. So you have to then have more than one avenue. You can say, okay, if it's true that her sighting was correct, then why is the guy wearing a lab coat? And you look this direction. If her sighting is not correct, then you might have a completely different way to look. Could be some guy came in from the garage and was scouting around, or he's maybe for whatever reasons he came in. Now, Sherry, the other thing is we don't know if she was always, when did she go into the office? Did she leave the office to go to the bathroom? Did somebody see her and then follow her back to her office and say, oh, look, there's somebody working in there, I can rape her? We do not know. And one of the most important things in investigations is to be aware of what you don't know as much as what you do know. Because some people want to be really appear incredibly brilliant all the time. And, well, I've examined a crime and and they're just telling nonsense. And that's not helpful, because you have to know what you need to look for. And you have to know where you're weak, what areas of your knowledge is weak. And in this case, it's extremely weak. I have all open questions all over the place. So I don't want to hoodwink into somebody thinking, wow, I could just figure this out in a heartbeat, when I have all these things I don't know. And that's what the detective, I'm pretty sure that's the same situation the detective finds himself in this case. I think he's got just a lack of information all the way around that doesn't help him narrow it down enough. And he was just hoping like hell, and is still hoping like hell, the DNA one day nails this guy. And if the DNA finds the guy, then you might have some answers to these questions. But until then, some things are not that easy to solve. If he left no DNA at all, I don't know what they'd do. And the fingerprint, well, hopefully it's his. They haven't found that matching anything either. So, well, that's nice. I'm not worried about that. As I pointed out, I'm closing in on 50,000, and that makes me super happy, not because of the number, but because that number represents that this channel is doing well enough to survive. And I'm thrilled to be at a place where it survives, because gosh, do I need that? You have to have enough, you have to have it survive. Otherwise you have to quit doing it, because most people quit YouTube because they realize this is not, I can't keep doing this. I have to earn a living. I can't work full time and not earn a penny. So all those things. So I'm reaching the 50,000 mark. So I'm like, thank God, because that is a point where I think the channel is sustainable. If I get to 100,000 one day, that would be nice. But I'm not worried about it at this point. I'm just happy that the channel is reached a sustainable point. And also that, I get all kinds of comments on how I could be better. Some of them are perfectly legitimate. Like, Pat, stop losing your pictures. You should write a list of, each one of the pictures and put all the notes, and you should use a different program and all that. Okay, I maybe one day. There's too much to do, and some of these things are much harder than people think. And I'm also very much a disorganized human being, as all of you know. And I do a lot of things out of stream of consciousness. I don't use hardly many notes, because I'm not writing, as I point out, I'm not writing a book. If I was writing a book, I wouldn't be doing YouTube. I'd be spending 40 hours a week taking notes. This is dreadful. I did that for Cleopatra book. Oh, like the worst year of my life, because I had to take so many notes. I had to do so much research, and I had to be more organized than ever. And it was very, very difficult for me. It's not something I like to do. So, but I'm me, and I'm going to do the channel the way I feel comfortable doing it. And yes, there's certain things I could do better, and someday maybe I will, or I just may not. But as long as I'm surviving and there's people here who appreciate the channel the way I do it, I can't satisfy everybody. So, but I'm not saying your comments aren't your constructive criticism is very useful. And sometimes I will take that into account. And one day you'll say, she finally listened to me. Oh, thank you, Jill. That's pretty much it. I'm real, raw, unedited, accurate. And it's just easier for me to be that way. And I don't have a lot of energy to be anything else. So, but hey, I didn't lose a picture today. It must not be Pat. I did not lose a picture. Oh my gosh. Of course, I didn't have that many either. So that helps. But anyway, this is a kind of an unusual case to do, and not kind of the things I would usually do. So, but I still wanted to do it because I think it's interesting when you don't have all the information. You can't necessarily come down to all those I got the answers type of thing. So this is one of my one of the few cases I feel like I really short on analysis, because there's just too much that's unknown. But I also thought the case was super interesting because those detectives came to my door. And so I'm like, do you want me to profile the case? Oh, no, you want to know if I'm harboring criminals. Oh, I see. It's like, it was just so weird, So, and that fact, I've worked so much at Prince George's Hospital, and I feel sad that it's no longer there, actually, and that it's moved on to being super fancy. It's pretty, the new one, but I kind of miss the feeling of family and the Prince George's Hospital. We call it PG Hospital, by the way. PG County. I'm in PG County. We're told to say Prince George's County because that's fancier than PG, but we're PG. And anybody who lives in PG knows they're PG. So, at any rate, yeah. So I have a lot of familiarity with hospitals, and I could have easily been Sherry. I mean, I could have easily been her. I could have been walking down one of those halls to buy myself some candies, and some guy could have just grabbed me and pulled me in any utility room, any place. There's so many doors that are just open. He could just open up a door and grab me and pull me in, rape and murder me, and walk away. Could have been me. I mean, she was doing nothing unusual except working and doing what she should be doing. And I don't know that she was targeted at all. She just might have been the unlucky one. And yeah. And even if she was targeted, I don't think the only thing that she could have been truly targeted for would be the emails that she said the security is bad. That's the only way I think she would be targeted. Other than that, I think either somebody saw her available as somebody to simply rape and murder. They wanted to do it, or she did catch somebody rummaging around in a room. I just think that's kind of strange to go from rummaging to a sexual homicide. That just strikes me as odd. So I don't know. And I just hope the detective, I wish him all the best. Let me throw his little picture up here again. I think he's done a fabulous job working on this case, caring about it as much as he has cared about it. And I think a lot of times detectives don't get credit for what they do. I do hope I have the right picture. Bernie Nelson. I sure hope that's Bernie Nelson. I'm face blind, so I think that's Bernie. Anyway, so that's Bernie Nelson, and he's still working on the case. So good luck, Bernie. I hope it's solved one day. I'd like to know the answer to this too. And I'm sure her poor three children. I hope one day they at least guys. I mean, by the time they get around to him, since it's 94, we're talking about, I'm trying to think, it's almost 30 years. If that guy was really in his 40s, he's in his 70s now. We have this interesting problem. We have sometimes when we get the DNA match years later, and the guy's already dead. He died like 2 years ago. He was 75 when he died. And so they never actually caught him. Or they do catch him and he's 85. And what do you do with the guy then? Besides which, he's lived his whole life. His victim is dead and lost their whole life. He got to live his whole life. And then you come knocking on his door and he's 85. And you're like, kind of late, huh? I already went on and did all the things I wanted to do. So is that justice? Not really. It's an answer, but it's not justice. And one also doesn't know if it takes 30 years to catch somebody, like you're pointing out about maybe he's using gloves more and using a condom. Maybe he's gone on to commit 5 other homicides. And 5 other women die because this case was unable to be solved. That's a sad thing. And that's where the lack of justice comes in. And not necessarily because the detectives weren't working their hearts out. Sometimes you just can't prove things. You can't figure out who it is. And I don't know. I'm not inside of the case. So I don't know. I could look at the case and go, how'd you miss this guy? Or I could look at the case and say, I have no idea either. So, and since DNA didn't match anybody, I'm going to say I'm probably on the side of I don't know either. But, but they care, and they work hard. So, do many uncaught perps confess when facing death? No, they take that to the grave. No, they don't have they don't need a clear conscience. They didn't think they'd do anything wrong. They didn't have a problem with what they did. They're psychopaths. They don't care. They don't care. As I always thought the best line was, the movie was Eye for an Eye with Sally Field, and best representation of a low-life serial killer ever. Who was it? Okay, now I'm gonna have to look it up. Who was it? It's great actor too. So I'm drawing a blank. Eye for an Eye, Sally Field. Kiefer Sutherland. I didn't have to totally look it up. Kiefer Sutherland plays the killer. He kills her daughter. It's the most accurate, horrifying, in a very pro-victim way as opposed to pro-killer way. If you ever want to go, that movie is great. Eye for an Eye, Sally Field. It'll break your heart. It's really terrible in that sense. But one of the things he says to her about killing their daughter, he says, it was nothing personal. And Sally Field looks at him and says, well, it was personal to me. But that's the way a psychopath thinks. Hey, it wasn't anything personal. It wasn't just, I didn't have anything against your daughter. Just wanted to kill her and rape her. Nothing personal. You think he's going to confess to? No, I don't know what happens after we pass on. No, maybe when we pass on, there's something that happens in the spiritual life that he learns whatever he's got to learn, and maybe he becomes that better person. I don't know. I leave that to God, and I'm not getting involved in that. But in this life, I can tell you, he doesn't care, and he will go to his grave not caring. Kiefer Sutherland, great actor, really good movie. Yes, oh, that's a great comment. Not personal, just convenient, and that is actually true. Eye for an Eye with Sally Field. Check it out. But it is heartbreaking, and it's got the most horrifying scene with her daughter being killed, and it's not because it's graphic; it's because of how it happens, and it's just absolutely heart-wrenching. And by the way, there's a book called Eye for an Eye that was supposedly based on, but has nothing to do with the movie, and it sucks. Don't buy the book. So go watch the movie. It's really, really good. Okay, that's it. I'm going to see you for the hangout this week. I think I don't know which day. It's going to be on Wednesday, I believe. I think this is my early week. I think this is the week I try to make things early for the UK. I'll figure it out, but I'll send you out the notice on that, and I will see you for that, and hopefully next Sunday for whatever I'm going to do then. And so I'll see you. Bye.